So, welcome everyone. It's spring, we think, we hope. In London, it's starting to get a little bit light, a little bit lighter. Can see out my window, it's getting a bit lighter this evenings. And Iliana, I think you said in Bern, in Switzerland, it's also getting a bit of spring, which is really great news. Amid all of the terrible things that are happening in the world today, at least we're getting a bit of
Exactly.
spring. So, before I introduce our esteemed guest, just want to say a few words about TrAIN, especially for those of you who may be joining TrAIN Open live event for the first time. TrAIN is a community of researchers. We're a community of researchers based at UAL, University of the Arts London, and Chelsea, Camberwell, and Wimbledon Colleges of Art. In our work, we aim to challenge top down notions of globalization and try to open up and create new visions of a more plural and worlded art and design history and theory. TrAIN's membership includes curators, art and design historians, artists, and theorists from across many disciplines at UAL, and we have a thriving community of PhD research students and research and associate researchers, which are very active in the life of the university and beyond. If you want to find out more about what TrAIN does and what we do, including future events, please look at our website, which is on the main UAL website under Research Centres. Just search for TrAIN. TrAIN stands for Research Centre for Transnational Art, Identity and Nation. And so it really gives me great pleasure now to introduce a dear, dear friend, ILiana Fokianaki, who since 2020, through her research platform, the Bureau of Care, has really examined the concept of care and its political and ethical dimensions in relation to environmental and social justice and their implications for curating and institution making. And of course, the etymology of curating indeed is from the idea of care, the notion of care. As founder and director of State of Concept Athens between 2013 and 2024, she transformed the Athenian art scene, bringing artists such as Lord Provost, Sanjay Vekovic, forensic architecture, Kadir Attia, and Kipwani Kiwanga to the Greek capital. She's curated exhibitions for Museo Reina Sofia, Madrid, for Eflux in New York, for Cadiz in Paris, the Institute Meli in Rotterdam, and the Museum of Contemporary Art Ljubljana, as well as public projects for institutions including the Virilist Center for Art and Politics in New York. Between 2022 and 23, she was artistic director of Survival Kit 13, a large-scale contemporary art festival organized by the Latvian Center for Contemporary Art. She lectures regularly at academies, independent spaces, museums, and institutions worldwide, and has convened discussions with thinkers, including Silvia Federici, Trinity Minhar, Jodie Dean, and Yanis Varoufakis. She publishes regularly in Eflux Journal and has contributed to numerous books and publications. And a series of her books, Great News, Iliana, will be published by Archive Books fairly soon.
It was
So,
supposed to be a couple of years back, but
yes,
motherhood took over. So
and that's part of what you'll be talking about this evening. So, without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Iliana. But before I do that, just really quickly, just to say that if you want to ask a question, so Iliana will speak for 35, 40 minutes or so, and then of course we'll open up with some questions. If you want to ask a question, please put it in the Q&A in the chat. Um, and also indicate if you want to actually say the question yourself, we can unmute you as well. So just let us know, and we can do that. But without further ado, let me hand over to Iliana. Welcome to TrAIN Open Live event. Thank you, Iliana.
hi, thanks so much, Paul, for the invitation. Thank you, Mary and Melanie, as well, for all the organization of this. It's also including a lot of admin. Academian life has become even more administrative since I was studying in London back in the early 2000s. Just to add that I'm no longer the director of Kunsthalle of State of Concept in Athens. I've moved to Switzerland, and I'm now the director of Kunsthalle Bern since 2024, since late 2024.
I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that,
Don't worry
Liana.
about
Of
it. Don't
course.
worry. I forgot to put it in my in the bio that I said, so no worries.
Many
But
apologies.
just because, location is important and from where one speaks is important, I am now speaking from the center of Europe and not the so-called global south or so-called global southern Europe, or what I prefer, the global majority. I think that's important also to say. So I kind of I'm reoccupying my position as a migrant, which I had for many, many years living in London back in the day, and very happily so. I think it's important. Maybe I start with giving a little bit of a general overview, also for most of the people that probably don't know me. I'm a curator and writer, sometimes educator. Was until recently based between Athens and the Netherlands, and currently based in Switzerland. I started the first non-for-profit institution in Athens in 2013, called State of Concept, and through State of Concept began many years later the Bureau of Care, which was a research platform. I say was because it's not officially kind of closed. The research continues through my writing, but it had also an active workshop program during the first years of its life. That started in 2020, and now my research is going on a second phase. I'll talk about it a little bit later. Why was I interested in care? I mean, when I started State of Concept in 2013, it was a very difficult period for Greece, and not only for Greece, but the European South. Because it was a beginning of a very deep financial crisis of, let's say, nationalist rhetoric and very much division within the European Union. Probably most of you are too young to remember, but it was the famous PIGS, PIIGS. It was Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Greece, and Spain who were accused of overspending, of not being fiscally proper according to to European Union's demands, and that basically began a very long trajectory of a very deep financial crisis that Greece has not yet recovered from. Why am I saying this? Because already I returned. I used to live in London. I studied there and I worked there for some years. I returned to Greece in a situation, in an ecology, in an art ecology, where there was a lot of private initiative from wealthy collectors that were bringing in artists and curators and were doing events and big exhibitions. And there were very small kind of pop-up DIY initiatives of artists that that had migrated abroad, mainly in the UK back in those times. But there was nothing in the middle. There were no institutional spaces. We still didn't have a functional contemporary art museum. So State of Concept basically tried to fill a gap of bringing in artists that had never shown in Greece, that were already established and had, let's say, some substantial steps in their career, not necessarily very established, but people that had, let's say, a footprint in the international art world, and very specifically were interested in social justice. And we wanted to begin this program because for us it was very important that we find works and practices that really respond to the current crisis. So these were the first years of State of Concept, and then from 2013 until 2019, I would say, where we hosted a lot of exhibitions. We had a change of government. We had a documenta that came in 2015, a lot of different changes, and the ecology and the landscape changed as well in terms of the local art community. And somewhere in 2019, we had a change of government. We had a very far right, in my view at least, government that came into power. And we began a trajectory, a different trajectory, discussing social justice through a different spectrum. That was a very big project that we did with forensic architecture in September 2019, discussing slow and fast violence. And then from 2020 onwards with COVID, and the really heavy measures that occurred in many countries like Greece, where the health system was already collapsing, we wanted to focus on the concept of care. And there begins a different type of institutional critique for us because we were looking, first of all, at what was happening in the US, in Europe, in the so-called first world, where the majority of zero contracted art workers were fired, were let go, were paused, were left unpaid, whilst big foundations or big museums like the Whitney or the Tate were keeping funds for supposed donor dinners that would never happen because of COVID. Whilst doing that, they were organizing public programs that referenced, let's say, care as a concept, specifically looking into, of course, care workers, because care workers became the center or the protagonists, if you will, of the COVID pandemic back in the day. And for me, that was extremely hypocritical. And I really wanted to discuss that in relationship to what one can say instituting. How is it that as cultural spaces, art spaces, we propagate for care, but we are so careless? And this is how the Bureau of Care basically began. And by looking also at the programs and also speaking with friends and mentors like Silvia Federici, who has extensively written on care labor and its political dimension, I realized that a lot of the people that contribute to the theory of care labor, but also paradigms that are outside of state structures of care labor, were invited within the museum, were invited in the institution, but just in order for the institution to showcase, their examples or to showcase their work, their themselves, their labor. But we didn't really learn from these practices that have to do with civic society and don't have anything to do with the art world, or very, let's say, selectively dab into the art world. So that was a second part of what the Bureau of Care was interested in. And we began interviews with let's say, citizen initiatives, with NGOs, with small collectives of individuals that were performing care in many ways or form in Athens and beyond. We worked also with other institutions in other places that they conducted these interviews on our behalf, in order for us to be able to see what are the mechanisms and how these non-governmental bodies, these non-official structures, these groups of people, these volunteers, how do they operate? What kinds of lessons, if you will, in quotation marks, we could learn in relationship to running and operating an art institution? What could the art institution learn potentially for it to change radically? And a lot of the things were not as bombastic or incredible as we would have liked, or it was not, let's say, great discoveries. But what was extremely clear for us is that we didn't want to speak with those that receive care, but rather we wanted to speak to those that provide care in any form or way. The circular and non-hierarchical structures and the changes of leadership and changes of power and changes of position within these structures, for instance, was one thing that we were very interested in. How designated responsibilities change. And the reason they do change is because people burn out very fast, or because people volunteer their work and they don't remain for a long period of time. On the contrary, there was also the fact that we had people that did remain in these structures, that did get burned out, did get workload from other people that were not as diligent and not as committed, or as others. So these were a lot lessons and thoughts and discussions that we were having. All of these material is gathered now, and will be presented hopefully in a publication sometime soon in relationship to the Bureau of Care. But for us also, it was very important to contour, let's say, theoretically, what is care and why are we discussing care. There were two texts that were published on eFlux around 2020 and 2021, discussing care. You can find them online for free. I'm not going to bore you with the full-on theory here, but I think for me what was important was that reading through care and accessing also the politics and ethics of care that have a specific trajectory, especially when it comes to feminist theory, it was very clear to me very early on that there is a schism in relationship to what care was and how it was understood, because of, let's say, the Western Enlightenment and how individualism somewhere begins there. And what I mean to say with that is that the way that the so-called Western world understands care is through the individual. And Paul very correctly said, of course, that curators, it's from cura, the word cura, and there's also the myth of cura, who creates a human, etc., and then cares for him, la la la. But the word cura, also in Latin, but also in other Latin-oriented languages or even Germanic languages, has various meanings. It can also be worry, it can also be responsibility. And I think these kind of less nurturing aspects of the term were the ones that were more fitting, it seems, for European philosophers from the Enlightenment onwards. And the concept of care developed and became to be also, I think, through neoliberalism. Well, first of all, through industrialization, and then through neoliberalism, began to be a term that describes an individual responsibility towards oneself, towards others. For me, the most important thing is that the concept of care is a concept that even in 2026 today that we speak about it is a concept that is feminized or effeminized. And even those care workers that are not necessarily women, and it's usually women that are migrant women even today that perform these kinds of labor. It's people that are from a migrant background. I think that was extremely clear and evident through the COVID pandemic, where we also saw the toll that it took for all those that were working on hospital and mortuaries, on deliveries, on other kind of driving services, taxis, etc., buses. And it was also extremely clear that this care labor that maybe is not now delivered by women is delivered by other women in their place. So until today, although supposedly there was a second wave of feminism, there were a lot of rights that were established and claimed by the second wave of feminism, we're still in a situation where care labor is not equally distributed within a household, but of course also the concept itself, let's say, the culture of it is considered a feminized concept. So for me, that was one aspect of it, and I wanted to discuss that and how that also relates to the art institution. And the second was, of course, this individualization of care that I spoke to before, and also the commodification of care. I mean, we have spoken a lot these last decades, I think, about self-care and what self-care does in relationship also to artistic labor. But again, it's a concept that is extremely commodified, and it's also a concept that is us and ourself. And what was interesting for me is to see an alternative, if you will, for a lack of a better word, or an other way of looking at care that doesn't derive or doesn't continue these threads, these theoretical threads. So what I looked at was specific examples of care being discussed and understood through collective endeavors. And what do I mean by that? I mean that, of course, we know that very well also from anthropology, that non-collectivist societies, which is the majority of, let's say, first world economies, they have absolutely this idea of care as a very individualized thing and concept. On collectivist or semi-collectivist societies, Greece, for instance, is a semi-collectivist society where familial bonds are still extremely strong. Care is considered also a collective responsibility in many ways. It's quite complicated, and I won't go very much into it because it has different sides to it. For instance, in Greece, collective responsibility does not apply to the relationship of a citizen to the state, just to give an example. But for me, that what was very interesting is to look at indigenous First Nations positionings, knowledges, and legacies in relationship to care, and how these are fundamentally different to what we understand as care. Because also the way that one understands themselves as an individual is through belonging to a collective of bodies, and how this collectivity also is a temporary condition within a larger ecology that they're part of. This first stage, let's say, of research into care, I mean, the third step, of course, was to look at how all these things are applied, are not applied, can be applied, are discussed, can be thought within the art institution and instituting. The big realization, of course, was, and I think I'm probably going to at some moment make a t-shirt about it. Art is what you can afford. Sorry, care is what you can afford. And I think for art institutions, like with other places, of course, this is very true, that specifically art institutions that operate outside of state sponsored or, let's say, establishment sponsored structures, like what State of Concept was, and many other institutions, smaller scale institutions from London to, I don't know, to Delhi, they all are held up by a lot of unpaid labor, by a lot of labor of love, care labor, that at some moment fizzles out, or it's impossible to maintain. And for us, this was a very important, let's say, lesson that we took in relationship to State of Concept and how it worked, but also in order to be able not to have burned out employees, in order to be able to have happy employees that are well paid. All these things need funds. In order for one to have funds, they need to do labor. So it's a little bit also like a dog chasing its own tail. But there were a lot of other lessons also that were learned that had to do with structures, that had to do with experimentations in relationship to positions of power and how they can become circular within an institution, how team meetings are conducted, that they could take forms of assemblies instead of like top-down structures where, you know, one is designated a specific role, and many other things. At some moment, of course, the question arose of what is the responsibility of art institutions also in relationship to the environment? And it was a very big, let's say, elephant in the room. Like, we can't talk about care if you don't talk about environmental care. And there somehow began a little bit the second part of my research, which I'm now developing for Kunsthalle Bern. But before we go to that, I wanted to speak a little bit about my latest text for eFlux, just to give you a synopsis of it and some new research that is not yet published. So I will try to share my screen now. Okay. Is that okay? Everybody can see? I hope.
Yes, that should be fine. I think I can see it.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah.
So this is my, I think 1 year now already, or a few months now, latest text for eFlux. The mother is dead, long live mother care without an M, other care. So care as alterity. And what I have been looking at, let me just very quickly change the format. Sorry for this. Just give me 1 second because I need to change the view format. Okay. I'll share again. I hope now it's better. Yeah. Is it?
Yep, it's fine from
Great.
my. Yeah, thank you.
Great. So, we, of course, still live, as I said, in a very binary logic, gender, race, nation, that really shapes power structures and social imaginaries. And for me, societies are really built by this sanctification of this traditional figure of the mother, which has been weaponized politically and culturally. And of course, this makes it so much harder to build intersectional feminist and queer alliances that are necessary for the current era. And I think from the time that I wrote this piece to today, where we have gone through um, an acceleration of extreme violence beyond description. And we are at the brink of let's say, a third world war situation of complete annihilation. And after 2 years, 3 years almost of dehumanization and of genocide, I think these alliances are more than important. They're absolutely necessary for our survival and for derailing this defuturing that we see in front of us. So I'm looking at the concept of alterity as we know alterity from Spivak, as otherness in relationship to this figure of the mother. And why am I doing this? I mean, this text was written in intervals from 2022 to 2024 when it was published, whilst I was gestating a human being and caring for it the first months of its life. So it was a text that was, it took a long, it took longer than usual for me to write it, but also it was a text that formulated, because of this embodied experience, differently my ideas on paper. So I'm very specifically interested in the way Western self-identity is defined through motherhood, mothering, mother care, however we want to call it, all these different facets of this performance of care labor. And the reason is because specifically mother, the figure of the mother, is the white heterosexual mother that often functions as the guarantor of biological reproduction, the transmitter of race and nation, the moral center of the family, the stabilizer of heterosexual futurity. So she is, of course, the other against patriarchy, but she herself is also the establishment, is the power, because she's instrumental to sustaining the subject, the heterosexual social order. And I think this also performative part of it, I think Judith Butler has spoken about it when they discuss how these norms reproduce themselves by really regulating kinship and intelligible life. So the figure of the mother has been really weaponized politically and culturally, and I think for me to see that this weaponization and this manipulation of this figure is resurfacing now because of right-wing rhetorics in the so-called, again, Western world, is interesting. Not just because of Wade versus Roe being reversed in the US, not because of all the far right politicians that are having their time in Europe. I think in the UK you also have a man that I once interviewed. What is his name? Nigel Farage, right? Isn't it?
Yeah, Nigel Farage.
Nigel Farage. In another lecture, I'll tell you why I interviewed this man. um, so for me, I think this is a subject that we will kind of face again and again. This also mother as the norm. Why am I talking about this? In the original text that I think Paul already sent you the link, I did not so much discuss the term alterity, and I think it's important maybe to discuss the term alterity here. That, of course, for me, as a white-skinned woman, I discuss alterity within a very specific context and always understanding the term through still existing racial power structures. And I think it's important that I state that because it's not part of the text. But alterity for me is a way of understanding ourselves as contrary to others, be it cultures, peoples, identities. So I was really approaching the figure of the mother as an ossified, let's say, social structure and symbol, as something that I personally felt other to, whilst be experiencing it, whilst having an embodied experience of it. So this text is really an attempt to replace this ossified symbol with a practice of care that is grounded in alterity, in what I name other care without the M, that dismantles binary thinking and resists authoritarian and exclusionary politics. Now, of course, as I said, the mother as an ideological construct has served patriarchy very, very, very well, and it's been a very dedicated servant. The text begins also with this idea of the mother, and it begins because whilst I am pregnant, a horrifying thing happens in Greece, which is one of the most, well, the most actually deadly sinking of a boat with refugees that has occurred in the European continent throughout these decades of refugee movement in Greece, which, let's say, roughly began around late 2014, 13. I was really thinking of the womb as a place where this Western supremacist logic plays out, but I was also thinking that some mothers are more mothers than others, or are more worthy than others. And this womb, I was really looking at it through Edouard Glissant's theory, where he talks about the womb abyss. And this womb, of course, is the sea. In Glissant, he's really speaking about the transatlantic slave trade and how this sea becomes this womb that engulfs all these bodies that are abducted and forcibly transported to another continent. But I think human trafficking also that exists through this refugee crisis is a different type of this phenomenon. So the Pylos shipwreck, which is the one that I'm speaking about in the text, was the deadliest pushback in the history of the EU, as I mentioned. And And the mother figure here operates as a central vehicle for white supremacy in maintaining exclusionary ideas about who counts as fully human or grievable, again in relation to what Butler also has spoken a lot. They have described this grievable, ungrievable life and how norms reproduce themselves again there as well. So my critique in the text was really centered around feminist missteps, how mainstream Western feminism has often reproduced this binary thinking rather than dismantling it, how some feminist currents, especially trans-exclusionary radical feminists, that I think you have quite a plague in the UK, unfortunately, insist on biology, aka the womb, as the litmus test, excluding trans and non-binary identities from feminist struggles. And this divisiveness, of course, helps neo-fascist and authoritarian forces to co-opt feminist language. And what I was also interested was this mother in politics and how we saw this the last years, these female political leaders from Meloni to Ursula der Leyen from the EU, of this far-right adaptation of the mother myth to legitimize toxic dominance and exclusion. And here femininity is repurposed as a cover for authoritarian agendas rather than liberation. So what is mother care? What is this idea of other care rather as alterity? It's care that really embraces difference, not sameness or universality. It's a politics of care that does not rest on essentialized biological roles. It's care that is grounded in collective relational practices, drawing on indigenous feminist and queer kinship models. I gave a couple of examples of practices in the text that I thought it was important to mention here. This is Selma Selman. Selma is an artist based in the Netherlands currently and is a Roma artist from Kosovo. And this is a performance that she has done these last years called Motherboards, where she's collectively with members of her family destroying motherboards from PCs to extract the little bits of gold, and then they collectively create a tiny little sculpture from the gold that is extracted. But her performance has to do also first of all, with stereotypes that have to do with the Roma people of how they, they collect things and they collect garbage, which especially in the Balkans is a very active one still, unfortunately. But also, on the other hand, this practice of recycling as a caring practice, collective practice, is very interesting for her. She's very characteristically saying that we were ecologists before even this idea of recycling existed in Europe. And of course, also this idea of value and care labor and what care means through, the use of an axe in order to extract gold, which is the ultimate material. My next steps in the research were the ones that I also wanted to a little bit to share with you. So care, to think about care through beyond essentialism, to think about care as not a biologically essentialized, that it cannot be reduced to wombs or bodies, exactly because limiting care to maternal biology limits our capacity to build broader coalitions. By unmooring care from gendered bodies, we open it to diverse forms of relational responsibility. And this breaks down the artificial binary between caregiver and other as well, allowing care to become a collective political practice. Again, relational, I think is important to think it like that. And the main takeaway for me was that care is a political practice, not a private destiny. And it's very rarely a private practice, actually. And the text's goal was really to operate as an invitation, not to be didactic, to really recontour how we think about care and reproductive labor in politics, culture, and human relations. So other care is not just a possibility or a proposal, but a necessity for fighting back against the new wave of far-right racist patriarchy. Abandoning our reproductive organs for collective liberation is the only way for feminisms to come back to life. A womb does not make one a feminist or a good person for that matter. Nor does giving birth make one a good carer and parent, because care is not tied to biology and familial bonds. One way to set ourselves apart from the mother is to conceive of care as alterity. The mother is deeply rooted in the belief that binaries are not to be challenged, changed, or abolished. Through other care, we can find new terms to describe selfless love. Seizing our means of reproduction, like really literally, and redefining who cares for whom and why might be the only path to the broad alliances that offer a way out of the dark misanthropy that lies ahead. That is the last paragraph of the text. So, although, of course, we still have to deal with this classic, it's the mother's instinct, it's not work, etc., from Federici to Nancy Fraser, who both highlighted how care can be conceptualized. The aim here is to further destabilize this equation of uterus, motherhood, and unpaid care. And AI, of course, and science in relationship to biological essentialism are quite interesting to look at. So I'm very much interested in three things now. To look into the role of trans and queer communities and showcasing the successful cases of non-essentialist other care bonds and the work of artists arriving through these pools of knowledge and experiences. One instance is the work of Celestial Morenzo Luz that you see here, who photographs queer communities in South America, mainly Mexico, Guatemala, and beyond. This is from a performative event by the curators of El Museo Transfemenino in Mexico City in November 2025. Ballroom culture and the houses constructions, of course, many of you know it from pop culture, I imagine, or from you yourselves participating. I'm very interested in this idea of mothers in houses and how these mothers don't have a gender, don't have a specific profile. They're just people that are extremely committed to their children, and they're very much children. I don't want to do children because they're very much their children and they're very much their parents. I'm interested also in practices that look into AI and technological advancements and how they are utilized in rethinking care. And here I had a link up to share with you. I have to stop screen sharing. Let's see if we can do this by me sharing now my Safari. Let's see. I hope that you will be able to. The video is talking about AI, but it's made with AI.
Today, we're diving into the fascinating world of elderly care robots. These high-tech helpers are transforming how we care for our seniors, offering companionship, assistance, and even health monitoring. But what are they? Why do we need them? And are there any risks? Let's explore. Elderly care robots are advanced machines designed to assist seniors with daily tasks, provide emotional support, or monitor their health. From robotic pets that offer companionship to humanoid robots that help with mobility, these innovations are making life easier for seniors and their caregivers. You'll typically see three main types of elderly care robots. Companion robots, like Porro the robotic seal, are made to bring comfort and reduce feelings of loneliness. Then there are assistive robots, which help with mobility or remind seniors to take their medications. Finally, monitoring robots keep an eye on safety and health conditions, alerting caregivers or doctors when something seems off. These robots aren't just sci-fi fantasies, they're here and they're changing lives. Let's take a look at some of the most popular ones. Meet Porro, a cute robotic seal designed to provide emotional comfort. It responds to touch and voice, helping reduce stress and loneliness for seniors, especially those with dementia. Loneliness affects over 40% of aged care residents daily. Abby, a bright, childlike humanoid robot, was created to address this issue by providing companionship, emotional connection, and meaningful interaction. Standing at 110 centimeters, Abby is equipped with facial recognition, omnidirectional microphones, multilingual capabilities, and memory storage, enabling her to personalize conversations and engage naturally with residents. Her lifelike
I'm just
and her
moving it a little bit so you see also the
American
third one.
counterparts, such as those from Boston Dynamics, Calvin 40 emphasizes performance over form, sparking global interest in its originality. As France's first industrial humanoid robot, Calvin 40 was developed in just 40 days. Thanks to Wondercraft's earlier work.
I think you get the drift. Let me just go back. I think I'm gonna stop share now. Just for me, what was interesting is, of course, that this idea of care as social reproduction that is biologically grounded is now challenged through these kinds of products on one hand. And one, of course, can only wonder if machines can stimulate this kind of dependent relationship and simulate as well nurture and attentiveness and empathy and care, then care and the performativity of care is revealed as something that is a patterned interaction or a learned performance or a productive protocol. And this, of course, challenges the idea that care flows organically through the female body. On the other hand, also simultaneously, it raises key questions as is care reducible to effective simulation? What is lost when care is performed through a program? And who benefits economically? And especially that, because AI depends on an invisible amount of enormous amount, I would say, of invisible labor, especially when it comes to data labeling, to content moderation, and to emotional filtering, that many times, although it appears post-biological, it really rests on gendered and racialized labor infrastructures. So care does not disappear, but it becomes displaced and obscured. So AI, on the same time that it demystifies biological care and intensifies at the same time the exploitation of feminized labor. So this is one part that I'm very interested in, and the last one is the phenomenon of commodification of bodily matter. There is also a strand of post-feminist thought and post-Marxist feminist thought specifically discussing that, or has been discussing that. And what I mean is mainly gametes, and by gametes is eggs, sperm, but also human milk that is being sold in black markets and marketplace on Facebook and what have you, all deriving and relating to reproductive labor. But I think I'm going to stop here because I've crossed my 40 minutes threshold. I can close with the slide of an artist's work that I'm really looking into now. Xin Liu, who's looking into, I hope you can see it clearly, who's looking into IVF as a process that is interesting and core to her practice. So I'll leave it at that. And thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you so much, ILiana. I took tons of notes because there was so much there that was yeah, rich and complex and yeah, you're. I mean, I followed your research a little bit over the years around this on the efflux writing, and it's interesting the way that you're also moving into looking at the kind of technological components of this and how what strikes me is that a lot of there's a kind of technological determinism that comes up that sort of says that when we deal with new technologies, everything changes and it's a completely new world. But as you mentioned, a lot of AI depends on gendered, racialized labor, which is invisible and it depends on
Paid as well.
right, exactly,
Or
Um,
free labor, because many times it's that we provide it through our phones or whatever without even knowing it. Yeah.
absolutely, that's the model, right? It's completely open. Um, why I think we're going to give some time for people to, I'm sure, ask questions. But I thought I would just start while people are thinking. Is I was just thinking about the implications of your analysis of care as other and mother care and a politics of care that embraces difference and non-binary politics, etc. How do you see that translating into an institutional frame and into a curatorial frame? So, for example, yourself, Kunsthalle Bern, which has a very interesting history, a very experimental history, but of course was that history of Kunsthalle Bern became very famous for a very gendered figure of Harold Zeman, who was, the so-called father of curating,
Yeah.
contemporary curating, which I think is a very problematic concept in a way. So, so it's interesting now you are, taking that history, that institutional history, of this kind of the father of curating, experimental curating, etc. I just wondered how you are approaching that in the program. When you mentioned things such as looking at a kind of non-hierarchical structure such as assemblies rather than
Yeah.
certain things. So maybe we could just talk a bit more about that. I mean, I know it's early days in the Kunsthalle, but I mean, you also worked, in Athens and other places. Yeah, just how does the theory and practice, how does the theory inform the practice? Yeah.
Yes, the theory informs, but it cannot transform. I'm a realist, and I want to say that, of course, also when one lands as a migrant in a different place, and especially a place of the so-called global north or global minority, I like to call it, and this is also a country which is in a bubble in itself. One realizes that it's also not as easy to change things because the Swiss are known also to not wanting change very fast. They're treading carefully. But having said that, there have been quite a few changes at the Kunsthalle. A lot of people, when I arrived, you speak about Harold Zeman. There is no one that I have spoken to about the Kunsthalle and has not mentioned this name. So it's, you cannot excise it from the legacy of the institution, from the identity of the institution. A lot of people told me, let sleeping dogs lie, blah, blah, blah. You don't have to speak about it. Everybody has been speaking about it. But I personally thought that A, this would not be honest, and B, father of curating, bring it on, great. Let's talk about that actually. Especially because I'm interested with this figure of the mother and the father and whatever that means. So the first trajectory, the first months actually of the program, we called it Fermenting Kunsthalle, and we did exhibitions, but in a completely different format. That was from June, July when I began, until April 2025. So less than a year, like 10 months, the first 10 months. There was a lot of infrastructural change that needed to happen. I also began my mandate with having a mandate from the fire department of the canton of Bern saying that we need to make a new door in the building. And this in itself was a big project. But we took time with that in mind to really think how we can change structures in the institution. And that meant revising contracts of all employees, revising artist contracts, payments. We already have been, because of the first female director, which was Valerie Knoll in 2014, we were already at wages. We already were in collaboration with Wage for Fair Pay and all these things, but we revised a lot of that. And for me, it was important because I was really looking through environmental care and this idea also of permaculture and how permaculture can inform institutional practices. This was, let's say, my proposal for the institution when I was invited to apply. And one of the main principles is that you need to know the ground that you wish to work with. If you don't know the ground, you can't cultivate nothing, basically. And I thought this is a very simple way to really start. Like, how do we know the ground that we walk on, that we occupy, the ecology that we're in? And for me, then, it was very important, first of all, to be in dialogue with this legacy and this specific figure, this mythical figure of the curator as auteur, and also to discuss environmental care and environmental justice in relationship to social justice in a place which is a very wealthy, very white, very privileged society. Especially a society that is propagating itself as also spearheading green economy whilst extracting in the corners of the globe, because Glencore is Swiss. Is a Swiss-owned company and is the biggest extractor globally, on planetary, however we want to call it. So the program begins in April, after we're through this fermenting period of restructuring, of opening doors, of closing other doors, with Ibrahim Mahama, who arrives at the Kunsthalle and wraps the building. And of course, in the collective memory of the Bernese, but also internationally, the Kunsthalle Bern is the first building that Christo and Jean-Claude, the first art building that Christo and Jean-Claude wrapped. And it's something that when you walk into shops in the canton, in the city of Bern, but other cities, you will still see posters of that event. So it's like an event, inscribed in collective memory. So for me, that was a dialogue. And that was a dialogue because also, first of all, the trajectory of the institution is a white, male, straight oriented institution, not just by its directors, but also by if one looks at the numbers, it's mainly white men that have been shown. But also because it's important to kind of discuss, at least for me, also coming from the migrant position, I think it's careful also and respectful to discuss what I understand as Switzerland as an outsider, which is banks, chocolate, gold, Heidi, the Alps, yodeling, all of these things. Chocolate being a big thing, and chocolate and watches, right? So it's important for me to discuss this idea of Swiss chocolate when the chocolate is actually not Swiss, because it comes from the Ivory Coast and from Ghana. So this is the beginning of the dialogue with Ibrahim, who tells me that all the farmers in Ghana that put this cocoa beans in these massive Utah sacks to be shipped to Switzerland have never seen a chocolate in their life and have never tasted a chocolate. The only thing they know is the seed. So the Swiss, export this Swiss chocolate to the world by using prime matter that is not Swiss. So the relationship, the mercantile relationship of Switzerland to the world as well, that involves extraction and uneven distribution of incomes, and the labor is unevenly distributed because you have all these people that toil in these fields to produce these cocoa beans, but they take less than 1 cent of that 7 franc cost of a chocolate. So all these are ways, let's say, that I'm interested in carefully attending to whilst being a director in this institution. And the program really is going to revolve around this, around the relationship of Switzerland to the world in the past and in today, and how the past many times is connected to today. Because of course also the Swiss have never colonized the people, but have been employed by the great colonial powers, by the French, by the British, and the Dutch, because of their expertise in warfare before the colonial period begins. And specifically also for the cantons of Bern and Zurich, they participate in the transatlantic slave trade by becoming shareholders in these companies officially. So the entanglements and the profits made are abundantly clear, to the point of making a Kunsthalle or making a museum, being able to build the thing, because the funds are there. And where the funds come from, they come from these. And we can say today the same thing, from Glencore to, gold in Swiss banks, etc., etc. So that's it, more or less. I think also I was lucky because I arrived at a time where these discussions are now beginning actively to be part of the art ecology. I know that it might sound silly from someone that comes from the UK, because these are questions that have been asked like 25 years, 30 years ago. I'm not sure they've ever been solved for any of us. I think, and it's worth it that we ask them constantly. But for the Swiss, it's a new discussion, and I'm honored that I can contribute to that.
Yeah. Thank you for that. One of the things that I think as well that I took from your talk, and which I think is really evident, is the way that is the way that neoliberalism plays a really important part. The language of care, the discourse of care, has become quite an important part of neoliberalism and has been co-opted by many institutions. So thinking about not only the art world but universities as well. Universities have, well-being. Well-being is now a part of the structure of the university. So when you have assessment, etc., it will always start with how are you, what's your well-being, etc. And that's part. I mean, I'm not. That's a good thing, but it's also just I'm aware, as you talk about, of the way that these things become appropriated, and in some ways. And the other thing that yeah,
Maybe
please,
it's not appropriation, but it's also like very superficially dealt with. You will forgive
right,
me. I can do like uh, the Balkan mayhem here, which is like when all these things happen, I very much do them as well with a team. We do check-ins
yeah,
and everything. But then also you're thinking, like, what is really important is that people get paid well, that they rest, that they don't have
right,
like overtime that is not paid, that they don't burn out. Like this is care. Um,
yeah.
Check-ins and well-being, or like silent spaces and
Tick
these things,
boxing.
they're a plus. They're a plus. But first, you need, I mean, especially because I've studied in the UK, I've gone
Yes,
through the system.
yes.
And the way the system is today compared to 2001 that I
Mm,
graduated,
mm,
I mean, how many people are burned out? How much is being asked by lecturers? Like how much administrative labor that is most certainly unpaid labor. I will
yeah,
just say it without asking anyone.
yeah,
I know it that it is like that.
yeah,
So all these things are great, but they're also a commodified version of what care is. So
yeah. But there's also, I think, there's a sort of generational dynamic to this discussion around care. I think, in the sense that one of the reasons why universities and other institutions have kind of centralized care in their system is because students have demanded it in some respects, right? And to take it seriously. And I was just thinking about what you were mentioning in relation to second generation feminism and some of the questions around the critiques of mainstream binary feminism and the kind of turf insistence on biology, etc. I was wondering, how do you feel that generational or possible generational difference has been, how do you negotiate that? How do institutions
It's
deal with that?
I have
It's
a
quite difficult.
it's very difficult,
Yeah, of
specifically if you have specific heroes as well from,
course.
mentors, heroes, and you see that you don't see the same. You see differently when it comes to these questions that have to do with excluding or including trans women or not, and what kinds of alliances you're willing to make or happy to make or eager to make or non-eager to make, etc. It's very difficult, but I'm quite black and white. Like for me, biology is, you know, it's like saying to a woman that because she doesn't get her period, she's not a woman. There are thousands upon thousands of women for various reasons that don't get their period for 1 year to 5 years to 3 months to whatever. Or to say to a woman, if you have not born a child with your body, you will never understand it. I mean, I do understand this idea of embodied knowledge that a lot of feminists also of that time speak about, but I don't need embodied knowledge to be an ally. And
Mm,
at the moment, I only care about that. I'm not interested. I'm not going to say to a trans woman, how does it feel to be a trans woman? I can stand by her. I can
mm,
be her ally. And it's okay if I don't understand what it means to be a trans woman. And
mm,
she doesn't understand, which I think she does actually, what it means to be a born woman or whatever. I don't understand these. It's my disagreement, and we respectfully disagree with older feminists in that. Um, it's difficult to navigate sometimes because also many times these second wave feminists are part of the curriculum to also go in terms of like
mm,
academia or art theory or institutional language and theory. But we are at the moment, I feel that if we do not accept that biological essentialism needs, I mean, what the text propagates for is exactly that. I'm very willing to throw my womb to the bin because of these alliances. They're much more important than my womb, without saying that these struggles of the second wave are not important and they were not completely dependent to the womb. I'm not saying that. But now it's time, like it's our cul-de-sac. The womb is our cul-de-sac. We need to just throw it out of the window.
mm. It, in terms of what you mentioned about AI and science in relation to biological essentialism, was quite interesting because you kind of are saying it's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it kind of hints at, in terms of AI practices and care, that it can simulate a kind of performativity of care. A care is released from the essentials of the body of the female body, right? And it can be possibly, it challenges the idea that care can flow through a female body. I think you mentioned, but on the other hand, there's an exploitative part of that. So,
Absolutely.
yeah. So, how do you situate your critique of AI? I mean, do you see that as something which is? I mean, I personally feel that AI is a complete disaster waiting to kind of
Probably,
control us all. But
probably.
is there something potentially
I
liberatory
mean,
about it?
AI on one hand, I mean, there have been much more intelligent people than me that had spoken about AI in relationship to labor and labor rights and um, redefining also specific fields and categories of labor that might be redundant from humans by humans because they can be performed by AI, etc., etc. And it will make shifts. I don't see white black here. I think it's a murky gray somewhere there. Uh, I do have an issue with those that fund and profit from AI. I think that is my biggest issue. The tech bros are my big issue. There is open AI that is evil, and there's open AI that has really helped people and is radically, revolutionarily helpful. I'm more concerned. I mean, the funny thing with the film, also the clip that I showed, is that these robots are women. Huh? just
Yeah,
just to say
exactly.
that they are women. They're robots, but they're women. And even Andromeda is a girl. Like only the last one kind of has supposedly masculine attributes, but the ones that are human-like are women.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
nurses are still thought as to make them with long hair and all these things.
yeah,
But what is for me more, let's say, what I'm more positive about is not AI, but science and gametes, as I spoke about, because there you also add to the degendering, let's say, of reproduction. And for me, that's a win. That's a win either way. There is a dimension of exploitation there as well, because these gametes need to be produced by someone,
yeah.
and that someone usually gets money from it. So it's a commodification of our reproductive labor. And I'm super interested in that. And I think the next texts will probably just focus on that.
Hmm.
Um, it's definitely a class thing there that is happening. It's definitely global minority to global majority, first gear economies to third gear economies, etc. But also not. To give an example, because I'm just like remembering things now from the research, the biggest sperm bank in Europe is from Denmark, who is not a third gear economy. Um, and it provides sperm in all countries of all types of economies in the West and beyond.
Hmm.
So the people that provide also the sperm are from students that need to pay off their loans to 45-year-olds that already have 3 children and they feel that they're contributing to humanity or something. So it's also not, there are many ways to see it. When it comes to eggs, there it's a little bit different, because it's usually younger women and women that need money, that produce them, that provide them in the market. There is, of course, also a strain, let's say, of theory or of positioning that comes from third wave or fourth wave feminists, however you want to call it, that say that I'm in charge of the means of production of my own reproductive
Hmm.
capabilities that my body have, and therefore, which is the same claim that also we've read about these last years, also for sex work or for porn work or for I don't know, OnlyFans or whatever you want to call it. All these different ways of using your body as you want and commodifying it temporarily.
Yeah.
So there are, for me, I'm not so savvy when it comes to AI to say, um, like many people will say, if it is monitored, it will just be liberating for all of us. I'm a little bit more skeptical, but I'm not
Yeah.
fully condemning. But for science, I would say that there it's much more interesting, because it's really breaking also the theories of Nancy Fraser and Federici and Angela Davis, if you will, that relate to this idea of reproductive labor, and how, of course, only women can reproduce workers to continue capitalism. So
Hmm.
that for me is the most interesting thing.
Yeah. I don't see any questions in the box, which means that everyone is
I hope
obviously.
the 26 people that are participants are.
But I thought that as we wind down, Ileana, thank you so much for your time and your brilliance sharing it with us. You mentioned about the program that you're doing at Kunsthalle Bern, focusing in the initial phase on, I think, fermentation, you mentioned.
That was
Uh,
the fermenting.
yeah. I guess, what's next? How does
So
that evolve?
now this was a process, let's say, an institutional critique slash institutional rebuilding process. Now we are full in the program. We're basically looking into the plantation scene is our
Mm,
we're
mm,
our
yeah,
prism, let's say, our glasses, our reading glasses,
yeah,
the plantation scene, and through the plantation scene, we're looking at Switzerland. From Melvin Edwards, who was talking about the plantations of the American South, from which he arrived, his grandmother was a slave, to today, Edgar Calel discussing the current exhibition that we opened last week, Guatemalan artist discussing the monocultural plantations that exist in Guatemala of coffee and of sugarcane, still from the colonial times to today, and what they do to the environment, to the soil, to the indigenous communities, etc., etc. This is a trajectory that is going to last until 2028, that we celebrate 110 years of our existence, and then it will be 4 years of other care.
yeah. Wonderful.
So, yeah.
And any plans or projects for Athens, dear old Athens?
I would really love to, but at the moment, and as I said before we started, there are a lot of things that the director's work is in Switzerland that does not allow a lot of time. There is one last book that we owe also to our friends to publish, and this will be the first one that we publish with archive books, which is Gossips. It's a book that it includes commissioned texts by Silvia Federici, by Françoise Verger, and other people. And then, which was supposed to also happen end of 24, beginning of 25, so it's already a year late. And then we're hoping to publish a book that contextualizes the Greek art scene a little bit better theoretically. But it's only going to be publishing projects for the coming 2-3 years, with the hope that we will also do a group exhibition somewhere in 2028. We're,
Sounds super exciting.
we're a nomad institution now, so
Yeah, yeah.
it's different things.
Wonderful. So a couple of questions have come up.
Okay.
One from Erica Hughes, who is a colleague at UAL. And she
Would
says,
that
thank you,
be Erica Scurti?
Erica Hughes.
Erica Hughes. Okay, sorry.
Yeah. Um, Erica says, thank you so much for the fabulous talk. I'm looking forward to visiting Kunsthalle Bern this summer. I have a question about care and displacement in AI. Much as capitalism has distorted care in a racist, classist, sexist manner that commodifies some bodies, so too do data centers contribute to the climate catastrophe. So care for some at the expense of others. I wonder in what ways might your curatorial practices at Kunsthalle Bern seek to intervene and work against climate damage, for example, for etc. So how do you kind of curate?
Excellent question. I didn't talk about one specific thing that happened during this fermenting Kunsthalle period, which was we collectively, talking about non-hierarchical structures, we collectively authored a code of conduct, which is going to be a new document that I think we're going to be the first Kunsthalle that has one. It's not going to be a 1 or 2 page document. It's a 30-page document that really describes all our operations and what for us is ethical conduct in relationship to these operations. And there's one chapter that is designated and dedicated to environmentally conscious practices, from recycling to not taking a plane unless it's 7 hours plus. So, but of course, that's a first little step. There are a lot of other things that should be done. If one wants to be environmentally sane,
Mm.
we shouldn't have exhibitions at all. We shouldn't travel to see them. But I think I will be a little bit radical here also, and forgive me if you disagree, but I think the exhibitions are not the problem. Elon Musk and Peter Thiel are the problem. If we deal with them, and Amazon is a massive problem as well. If we deal with them, then if we take one extra plane, I think we'll be fine. Or if one takes a train too much to see a show, but we are very conscious of that. Data centers is an issue that is close to my heart. Also, I have a very good friend who's doing excellent research, the curator Marina Otero Versier in Spain about data centers. And it's close to my heart because in Spain, in Portugal, in Italy, and in Greece, there are a lot of data centers happening because there's still cheap labor to run these data centers. But what that means in relationship to water resources is a lecture in its own. And Marina is actually specializing on that. She's really working on that. So I recommend whoever is interested in data centers to look up her work.
Fantastic. So there's just two comments rather than questions that you might want to respond to, Ileana. Firstly, from Elena, it says she went to the Matt Collishaw talk last year and left in doubt that AI is gender bias against women. It can easily make women's lives worse. Gabrielle Samuels, who was at Oxford, was a very interesting speaker that might be worth contacting for how these biases play out for women's health. Finally, misogyny in women's health is starting to be spoken of. Thank you for your timely conversation. And Paula,
Be lovely if you copy paste these to me or send them in an email, so I'll have them as well.
absolutely,
Thank you so
yes,
much
do
for the
that.
comments.
And there's one final one from Paula Terranil. She says, not a question, just to say I love the way Ileana works from theory to activism or critical thinking to practical daily issues, life issues. I entirely concur on that.
Well, thank you so
That's
much.
a great way to end today. Was there anything you wanted to end with, Ileana?
I just want to say my email is iliana@kunsthalebern.ch. It's very easy. Please, if you have any questions, recommendations, disagreements, anything, feel free to reach out. I'm very happy to continue the conversation.
Fantastic. One last one from
Yes.
Ace Koklu. Thank you for the brilliant talk. Could we please hear the name of the surname of Marina? That sounds very interesting.
Marina Otero Versier with an R in the end. Marina Otero Versier. She's a visiting lecturer at Harvard University as well. She's not because she's my friend, but she's a genius. So I totally recommend you to look up
Well
her
worth
work.
looking up. Thank you so much, Ileana. Thank you for your
My
time. Thank
absolute
you for your
pleasure.
wisdom. It was a
My pleasure.
wonderful conversation. And yeah,
Thanks,
looking forward to
everyone.
seeing
And
you
hopefully
soon.
we see you in live in the.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Bye, guys.
So
Bye.
again, thanks for everyone for coming as well. Take care.